Academy and Museum, including Reed Kroloff there and Sarah Turner, who is normally at the podium for events like this. I would like to welcome you to the first lecture in the spring edition of the Academy's public lecture series. Yes, spring is just around the corner. We have a lot of public in the audience tonight. So on most Tuesday evenings during the academic year, the Academy gathers in DeSalle Auditorium here to hear some of the nation's most innovative and thought-provoking practitioners and thinkers. These speakers include artists and historians, designers and writers who find their way to Cranbrook under the auspices of one of the Academy's 10 departments or the Critical Studies program, or in the case tonight, the Art Museum. Joining us later this month, just to give you a little bit of a preview of a few of the upcoming events, a week from tonight will be Jersey Seymour, a hot European designer. And then breaking the Tuesday night rule a little bit on Sunday, January 27th, Alex Soth and Siri Engberg will be here. Alex Soth, of course, is the photographer whose retrospective is in the galleries upstairs, and Siri Engberg is the curator of visual arts at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis and was the curator of the Alex Soth exhibition. And then finally, yet this month, and I'm not going to give you a preview of anything beyond this month, on again Tuesday night, January 29th, will be the self-described welder, artist, and designer Johnny Swing. While these lectures are integral to the Academy's graduate program, we are pleased to be able to invite members of our art members group as well as the general public. So thank you for joining us tonight. To start the season, however, we are honored to have with us the writer and furniture historian Brian Lutz. Brian has what I think of a little bit of a split personality. On one hand, Brian works on the corporate side of the furniture industry, having learned the business in New York, in the New York sales division of Knoll, before moving to Helsinki, where he lived for 11 years and served as export director for Artec, of course, another famed company that still manufactures all of Alvar Aalto's designs. He currently works more as a U.S. market development consultant for Scandinavian furniture manufacturers. But for many of us, it's the other half of his personality for which we know and admire him. Over the past decade or so, he has emerged as one of the most important furniture historians. I first met him when he was researching Eero Saarinen's furniture for the huge Eero Saarinen exhibition that made its American premiere here at Cranbrook in 2007. And during that project, he worked closely with the archive staff here, including head archivist Leslie Edwards, who is joining us tonight as well. On the heels of that research, he published Knoll, A Modernist Universe in 2010. With an introduction by Reed Kroloff, this book has become the definitive history of this legendary furniture company, a company that so many Cranbrook graduates, of course, starting with Florence Schust Knoll, have played a leading role. Although he is currently researching the influence of mid-20th century Swedish design on the modern movement, tonight we are here to help him celebrate the publication of his newest book, Eero Saarinen, Furniture for Everyman. And I realize that I failed to demonstrate all of his other tomes. Eero Saarinen, Shaping the Future. This is the Knoll book from 2010. And for those of you that haven't yet purchased this at the front desk, this is the book that that we are celebrating tonight, so they won't obstruct his view. I will put them under here. With a preface by Florence Knoll and an introductory essay by another great Cranbrook designer, Niels Diffriant, The book is the one that every serious curator, collector, or admirer of Eero Saarinen or more broadly mid-century modern design needs to have in their library. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Brian Lutz back to Cranbrook.
Good job. Am I? Yes, I am. Wow, jazzy Europeans are coming. Tonight, it's me. I told Greg downstairs that this is the third time I've been fortunate enough to come to Cranbrook to talk about Eero. So my challenge then is to tell you the story in a way that perhaps has a certain freshness to it, perhaps a little bit more interest, but the story remains pretty much the same. So for those of you who've heard the other lectures, I think there's enough interest in this story to hear it a few times. Let's start with the book and where the book actually began. As Greg said, I lived in Finland for about 11 years. When I came back, I was working with a Swedish furniture company and decided that I really wanted a womb chair for my home. So I went to Knoll. With all due respect, the Knoll studio rep in New York City was able to tell me what colors the chair came in and what finishes and what the lead time was and the price, but they really didn't really know much about the chair itself. So I decided, well, I'll go and buy a book about Eero Saarinen's furniture. And I went and looked, and there were very few books then, as there are today, and all of them concentrated on his architecture. And a few of them had a page or two, and some even a chapter, a short chapter on the furniture. But there was no dedicated volume about his furniture. So I decided, well, I'll write one. And I called up Cass Bradley, who was president of Knoll, and said, can I get in the Knoll archives? And she said, sure. So I went to the Knoll archives, which consisted of about 9 two-drawer lateral files in the basement of a building in East Greenville, Pennsylvania. And I realized there's a lot more research that needs to be done on this topic before it can become a book. That was in 2003. For about the next 5 years, I researched the topic and then began to work through a series of publishers until I got to, that's right, in the middle of this process, Knoll called me and said, Brian, Rizzoli wants to do a new history of Knoll. Would you like to write it? And I said, of course I would like to write it. So I took a 3-year break in the middle of my 9 years of working on Eero to write the history of Knoll. And when I went back to the Eero book, the publisher, the editor at Rizzoli recommended that I get in touch with Pointed Leaf Press is the name of the publisher that's done this book. And I think that they've done an admirable job of presenting the story visually because the person who is the publisher that owns the publishing house is a former marketing person from Knoll from the 1970s. And she has a clear understanding of the importance of the graphics and the visual presentation of this material. One of the benefits for me personally in this project was getting in touch with Florence Knoll and talking to her many, many times about this. And one of the times we spoke, she said to me early on, who's doing the graphics on this book? Who's doing the layout? And I said, well, I don't know, because that's not my decision, really. That's the decision of the publisher. At which point she said, you've got to take charge of that, and you've got to take charge of that right now. So I said, okay, knowing that I couldn't. But when the publisher told me who they were going to be using to do the layouts, I said to him, that a man named Sam Shahid in New York City, I think Florence Knoll would be quite pleased with the choice that Susie's made on the graphic designer. Sam had done something that probably everyone in this room has seen, which are the Abercrombie and Fitch ads and the Calvin Klein underwear ads with those all the black and white photography. Sam loves black and white, and so Susie's choice of him to do this book was perfect because of the preponderance of black and white photography. The title. I didn't know that publishers pick titles, and I didn't know that unless you're J.K. Rowling, then she picks the title, but authors like me don't get to pick the titles. I had a different title in mind, but the title that Susie picked, I think, fits quite well, and it comes from this quote from an article that appeared in Architectural Design in 1957, in which, for those of you who can't read English, though we use mass-produced parts in architecture, a building is custom built to the extent of solution to a specific problem, whereas in furniture design, the client is everyman. Greg showed you this volume. Yale Press produced this as the catalog for the exhibition that celebrated Eero's centennial that ran from 2006 to 2010. And for that, I did an essay about his furniture, which I titled Form and Innovation, and that's what I'd like to concentrate on here tonight in this talk. I guess at Cranbrook, is it necessary for me to tell the whole Saarinen history at Cranbrook? If you'd like me to do that, stay after class and we'll go over that. But for now, I'll just say that Eero came here when he was 12 years old in 1923 and went to public school, did not attend Cranbrook, as many people claim or assume that he did. They assume that Eero had to have been a student at Cranbrook since his father was the headmaster, etc. But he didn't. However, he was involved in many of the projects that Eliel did here, including this one, which is the master bedroom of the Saarinen house, for which Eero Saarinen, at age 19, designed the furniture. This is the only thing that Eero did in this photograph is the table. I'm pretty sure the chair was by Swanson. I think Bob Swanson, I'm pretty sure, did the chair. Yep. But Eero also did the nightstands adjacent to the bed and the beds themselves. This table and the nightstands still exist. The beds have been reproduced. They're not the originals. But the furniture that here at Cranbrook that Eero is best known for, I assume, are the pieces that he did for Kingswood School, which he did in 1931. After he completed high school in Bloomfield Hills, he studied sculpture for a year in Paris, and when he came back in 31, he did the furniture for Kingswood. This is the dining room, still the same furniture. In what year was that? I guess it was 2007 or 2008 when the exhibition, the Shaping the Future exhibition, opened here. There was a dinner and a reception, and this dining room was filled with luminaries and me. And I had the opportunity that evening to sit at a table with Niels Diffrient, who was a student here in the late 1940s and worked part-time in Eero's office. Niels, as you may know, is probably the leading authority on ergonomics, human factor engineering in seating. And when we sat down at the dinner that night, Niels chuckled and said, I guess Eero still hadn't learned very much about ergonomics when he designed these chairs in 1931. Comfort is not necessarily the leading factor in these chairs, but they are reminiscent of a style that sort of Biedermeier-esque style that he sort of inherited from his father, and they're not true to a form of his own, in a vocabulary of his own. That was to come. So this form was an inherited form in these pieces. In 1931 to 34, he went to Yale to get his architecture degree. When he completed that degree, he had a one-year traveling fellowship where he went through Europe and the Near East to the Middle East to study architecture, after which time he was asked by his father to go to Helsinki and complete an architectural project that Eliel had been given actually before the First World War, but it had been postponed. By the 1930s, the money was available, and Eliel, who was busy here, sent Eero to Helsinki to work on the Swedish theater. That's him on the left signing the documents with the financiers and the theater people. The most important thing that happened, well, for me, the furniture guy, the most important thing that happened that year for Eero was his exposure to this company, which started in 1935 in Helsinki. This is the company I work for over there. And the legend has it that Aalto, who had been designing furniture in a modern idiom from the late 1920s onward, was working with a separate factory to produce the furniture, and they were none of them, neither Aalto office or the factory office, were very skilled in English language communication, and that was kind of like already the lingua franca of international furniture sales. And so Aalto and his wife and an entrepreneur and a financial backer formed a company called Artek to address the global distribution of Aalto's furniture sales. They opened this shop in 1935 on the street adjacent to the Swedish theater. So in addition to the fact that Oliver Aalto was Eliel Saarinen's personal friend, and Eero had the opportunity to meet with him frequently, Eero surely walked past this furniture every day on his way to the theater. And there was the discovery of the modern expression in terms of the materials and the form, and that old dictum that, that Dick Schultz taught to me about the definition of modernism. A modern form is one in which the structure and function are revealed simultaneously. And this and the Paimio chair. This is not the actual Paimio chair. This is the Model 31 cantilever chair. Here shown in a grainy version. Sorry, Greg told me this is one of the most sophisticated digital projectors, and I said I can downgrade it considerably with my photographs. But Aalto had realized, when he saw some tram seats that were made in Estonia by a company called Luton, that was run by the man who invented the process by which plywood could be industrially produced. Aalto saw these formed plywood seats and realized, there's the material form that I've been looking for to do the furniture for the modern interiors. The other thing that happened to Eero that year was meeting, where's Leslie? Where, I can't see. The woman on the left in this photograph is Marianne Strangel, who was for many years, she was head of the textile department, wasn't she? After Loya, for many years. Yeah. With her is her partner, a woman named Elna Kiljander, who was one of the first female architects in Finland, and worked on the interiors of the Parliament building where these two met. And they formed a shop in 1933 called Koti Hemmet, Koti being the word for home in Finnish and Hemmet being the word for home in Swedish. And that was the place that brought modern things to Finland for the first time. Unfortunately, they were driven out of business by Artek. However, Koti Hemmet is significant because that was the shop where the founder of Artek's husband saw this glorious furniture that Aalto had designed and encouraged his wife to start a company to promote Aalto's furniture. So, yeah. So So 1935 for Eero Saarinen in 35, 36 in Helsinki was the time when the light bulb sort of lit in Eero, and where he made his final transition away from the style influence of his father and the national romantic movement in Finland, more towards the European modern movement. He came back from Helsinki at the end of 36, 37, where he met this young man on the left who was actually more or less a research fellow here for Charlie Eames. And they became quite close friends. And they had this habit of these white things that they put in their mouth. I don't know what those are. But did you notice? Everybody was smoking back then. These ladies are smoking. These guys are smoking. These two, Eero Saarinen recognized the creative juices, if you will, that flowed between these two gentlemen, and their inspiration and their curiosity and their competitive nature. And Eero put them to work on a number of assignments for interior furnishings for projects, both the Klein Anne's Music Hall and the Crow Island School. Niels Diffrient told me, I said to Niels, here's a really interesting thing that Charlie Eames built as a way to experiment with what makes the best form. I said to Niels, was this sort of like the precursor to ergonomic research? And Niels said, no, everybody did that. So I don't think Niels likes to talk about other people's ergonomic research. So, okay, Niels, Niels is the best. And out of that came this chair, which was very much influenced by a chair that Eero had seen that Aalto did for the Paimio Sanatorium. The scroll chair is the one that gets all the ink. He did a brilliant little stacking chair that Charlie and Eero decided to shape a little bit more, make it more organic, if you will, and upholster it. Speaking of organic, in the Klein Anne's Music Hall and Crow Island School were the late 1930s. But in those two projects, Charlie and Eero took their first steps toward bringing the modern expression in terms of materials and production to the interior components of the architectural works of Eliel in those cases. But this was the moment when their stars sort of rose together. It was the organic design competition, which was, Greg and I were downstairs here, and they have one of the chairs from that exhibition is in not this building. Yes, it is this building. It's over there. We won't tell you where it is because I don't want anyone to steal it. But the things that Eero and Charlie did for this exhibition really changed the way furniture was conceived, styled, designed, and produced. This was the watershed moment for the modern movement in terms of furniture, at least, in the US. And what it boiled down to was, it was Eero. Not to diminish Charlie Eames's contribution in any way, but Eero was the one who saw that a number of people have been molding plywood in 2 dimensions since the late 19th century. This was nothing new, but no one had done it in 3 dimensions yet. No one had done Aalto did it briefly. They tried a chair, but it was not successful. As well, Walter Gropius also tried a chair, it was unsuccessful. And Eero and Charlie decided they were going to do this chair. So they came up with the notion that not only they would not only reduce the shape in such a way so that it conformed more closely to the human body, but they would also reduce the amount of upholstery and the factors related to the support of the body to its minimum, because thereby reducing the production cost and the size and the scale of the pieces. They won the competition. They won in their category. They also won in another category of what we call today case goods, which are also in this building, the winning designs. And in January of 1941, let me just say one further thing about this. The modern movement, the Museum of Modern Art, was founded in 1929, I believe. And from that moment forward in America, there was a concentration on an acceptance of the importance of the aspects of modern thinking in the way of life for everyone, for all Americans. But the forms that the objects of the modern movement took in this country were really more strongly determined by the Paris exhibition of 1925, which was actually Art Deco. Now, Art Deco, gross oversimplification. It tends to the modern, but it doesn't abandon decoration. So these things were all somewhat decorative, although somewhat simplified. Eero did not subscribe to this, to the American modern movement. He was more dedicated to the classical European approach, and so the pieces that came out of Eero were, and Charlie, had the strict regimen of the European, that is German, approach to the modern movement, but they had a more humanist component. And to my way of thinking at least, that had a lot to do with Eero's influence from Alvar Aalto. Another thing happened in 1941, which is that the kid that Eero grew up with here at Cranbrook, Florence Schust, completed her architectural education and came to New York. And as she said, in 1941, if you were a female, or if you were a woman and an architect, you did interiors. And so she was working at an architectural firm, and a young, devilishly handsome furniture salesman named Hans Knoll came in there, and Hans and Shu had this kind of bright flash of light thing or something. I wasn't there. And he realized that she could do something he needed very much, which was interior design. And she realized that he could do something that she needed very much, which was give her the client list to produce the kind of work that she wanted to do. And so first he hired her as a freelance designer. Hansen was working with Jens Rism heavily for doing a lot of furniture design and collection pieces for Knoll's company. And then in 1943, Jens went into the military and Hans hired Shu. And in 1946, he married her. The connection between Eero was logical. The first thing that Shu did when she came in to Hans's company with authority, that is the position of more or less director of design, they didn't really have titles, I don't think, really. I never saw any titles. But the first thing she did was clean out a lot of the stuff that Hans had in the line. Now you have to remember that during the war years, Hans started Knoll roughly 1938, and during the war years there was no production of furniture in this country and in most of Europe, because most of the production facilities that had been dedicated to furniture were doing war materials. So Hans had a lot of Swedish things and a few oddball bits and pieces that he had collected here and there. Well, as the well-known quote was that the furniture collection that Hans had was too romantic. So she wanted to clean it up, and where else would she turn to for designs but here? And the first person that she started to work with at Knoll was Ralph Rapson, and they adapted a piece that he had entered into a competition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1948. And I'm sorry, it was an earlier competition than that. But the second person that she started to work with was Eero. So this is Eero's son on the hobby horse thing, and then Eero's parents, Eliel and Loya, and Eero, Lily Swan, his first wife, who was a sculptor here, and then Shu and Hans, looking like he's bored to death. Oh, by the way, in 1940, Eero became a naturalized U.S. citizen, and in 1941, I think, he moved to Washington to work for the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA. And he was doing manuals or something. He also did some kind of design work independently of that. And Hans Knoll told, Eero told Shu, don't stay in New York and work for this guy. He's not going to amount to very much. Come down here to Washington and live with me. And she said to me, the last thing I wanted to do was to go be Mrs. Saarinen. So this answers a lot of questions that I get. I get a lot of people asking me, what's the deal between the two between Eero and Shu? And I've always said what she told me, he was my big brother. And the guy that works for Knoll in London, do you know Justin Pratt, the Knoll London guy? Justin Pratt says that I am Eero and Shu's love child, which is, I would like to be now. Wouldn't that be nice? I could get those royalty checks. The first thing he did for Knoll, which used available materials like parachute webbing, sorry for the grain in this picture, but Leslie, I should have gotten a better version of this. And this is a prototype in some basement here somewhere. It was a very simple thing to produce given the materials that were available. It was easy to laminate wood in 2 dimensions and make those arm leg extensions and a simple frame and the parachute webbing. And Knoll produced an upholstered version of this. But here's the clever thing that Eero did for this piece, which is, according to, this is her handwriting. He used the form of the wood frames in the seat to make a triangulated connection to strengthen the whole thing, instead of, as she said, the conventional kind of base that you'd find on any chair, then or now, pretty much, which to me is a clear indication of the kind of advanced thinking that Eero had about being innovative in terms of form and construction. The other thing that this chair shows is his idea of 3 planes of support. He talked about the seat, the shoulders, and the neck and head, which he extended into the next set of designs that he did. While he was in Washington, both he and Charlie Eames were very frustrated that they couldn't ever perfect the compound molding of plywood. As Don Albinson said, who worked with them on the organic design chairs, you can compound mold plywood over a huge span. They were making fuselage, airplane fuselage components and canoes out of compound molded plywood in the early teens. But that's, I don't know, 12 feet or more in terms of an airplane. But as Don said, you can't make a soup bowl out of plywood. Well, actually, they probably are doing that today, but back then they couldn't. So Eero knew that the solution was something beyond plywood. As good of a material as it was going to have to be something else. And these are while he was in Washington, he played around with materials just to explore the forms that were possible in terms of support and an aesthetic expression, including this one. Ooh, I should have one of those cool laser pointers. Remember this chair when we go along here, and that one, which is the womb chair. So he took, laser pointer? Oh, I'm going to put it in people's foreheads then. Oop. There's the womb chair. And this one is one of the ones that was developed too. So he took 3 of these to Shu. And the the grasshopper chair was in production and was not terribly successful, although it's really a remarkably cool piece of furniture. So there was a lounge and a side chair and an office chair. And Shu said in the famous quote, she said, "I'm so tired of lounge chairs that are really two-dimensional things. They're just like a straight line that goes up and down." Now, she's about this big, I think. And she said, when I lay in like the Corbeau lounge, or Breuer did a lounge like that, Alto did one, my knees don't want to bend where the chair says they're supposed to bend. She said, "I want a chair that I can curl up in." Eero, being a smart guy working with a manufacturer, came up with this idea. And the idea, I think it's a perfect example of Eero's ingenuity, innovation, and the use of materials, or the application of materials within the limitations of the day. Okay, so you can't compound mold plywood, or he couldn't. It was not possible at that time. So he realized that if you take a cone, even if you don't take it, in a cone, every point on the surface of a cone is part of a straight line that is a component of a two-dimensional bend, not a three-dimensional fold or impression. So if you form a cone, and then you push in the sides here and here, and then you cut off the back, you have the effect of a compound molded shell that's actually only bent in 2 dimensions. And the first ones that he did here were actually done out of plywood, and they weighed 1,100 pounds. And Shu was this big. So Dick Schultz once told me, he said that Dick Schultz worked in the Knoll planning unit, and Richard Schultz, and designed that glorious outdoor furniture that now has returned to Knoll. And he once said to me that, oh dear. I can't remember what he said to me. Something about this. Oops. I just like to drop names. Dick Schultz said the design of furniture used to be a lot like all the sciences in the post-war era. That is, everybody could do the technology up to this point, and everybody knew what the next step was. It was over here. It was just out of our reach, and we were all racing like hell to be the first ones to get there. Well, the compound molding of plywood was something that everybody was racing to do. In fact, Charlie Eames brought Harry Bertoia out from Cranbrook to California and said, find a way to do this. He wanted to be first. But Eero understood that the plywood technology was too limiting, and what he needed was something new. And what he found was a boat manufacturer in Trenton, New Jersey, that had been building hulls for boats for the Navy during the war out of a fiber-reinforced polyester resin, a material that today lives by the name of fiberglass. Exciting, and that, but in that the fiber is glass. In the initial fibrous material that was used in these shells and hulls was sisal, and sisal had one advantage for upholstery, which is that you can staple into it. Well, glass fiber reinforced polyester is much more dense and hard, and you really can't staple into it. So the first womb chair and the small side chair, the 72, the little one, oh dear, well, you remember what it looked like. They were made with sisal, and the chair was launched, and those 2 chairs were launched in 1948. The plastic back version didn't come of the side chair, did not come until later, because, as again Dick Schultz said, the modernists live by this dictate that there's a certain truth to materials in what they do. And he said, and the truth about fiberglass is that the surface was really ugly. So, and if you've ever seen any of those very early fiberglass chairs that Charlie Eames did from the early 1950s, you can see the texture, the surface texture is so irregular and mottled that it gets dirt and it's really kind of grungy. Shoe would not allow that. So they stuck with the sisal, as long as they had the sisal backs in the side chairs, they were always upholstered. 1948, the womb chair and the side chair were launched in New York, and no one remembers the side chair launch because it was rather unspectacular. But everybody remembers this chair, the womb chair. Maybe mostly because of this Herbert Motter ad for the New Yorker in the early 1950s. And here was by the late 1950s, Eero, among other people, had solved the dilemma of the glass fiber reinforced polyester resin shells with what was known as a veil technique, where they took a layer of very finely woven glass fiber cloth and put it in the surface of the mold, and then blew the fibers into the mold, and then put the resin in, and the fine mesh on the surface acted like a wick and drew all the resin to the surface, and it was perfectly smooth. I'm not sure if there's the company that Knoll worked with, or Eero worked with to explore that was in Long Island, a company called Lunn Laminates, who did the first bodies for the Corvette in 1953 using this technique. So we have then the final chair in the group, which was the office version. Now, one of the advantages of having a glass fiber reinforced polyester shell is that it could be thinner and lighter and more flexible at much less weight than a plywood shell. The flexibility was not a problem in the womb chair, because if you've seen one, you see that the frame consists of tubing that connects under the arm. This chair had no support under the arms, and this was supposed to be an office chair. And I don't think they had BIFMA tests back then, but they did have customers who expected their chairs to not break. So they couldn't make this work. With the way the shell, the thickness of the shell, the configuration of the arms, they had to abandon it. And Eero, conveniently enough, oh, and this guy, we'll talk about him in a second. Eero found out about this chair, which is down in the basement, that Sue Knoll had designed for this office, which is the Rockefeller family offices at Rockefeller Center. She told me that, she said, I wanted a chair where the arms and the back were all sort of one contiguous curve. She said, and the only chairs that were available like that were made out of all wood, sort of like a bar room kind of chair. And she said, I wanted something upholstered for the elegance that the Rockefeller project required, so she designed this one herself. Eero and Niels Diffrient developed the Shoes chair from a wood back construction to a resin plastic back chair. This is Niels when he was here at Cranbrook with a student project he had done using a material similar to what they eventually wound up using on the 70 series chairs. This is the clay model that they built. Eero would play around with all these little scale models until he got one that he liked. Charlie Eames said he would do 1,000 and pick the best one and throw the rest away, and then do 1,000 based on that, and then pick the best one. I don't know if that happened, but after they got to the form of the chair that they liked, Niels Diffrient made this full-size clay model, which then they made a plaster mold of, and took to New York, and Schuh and Hans approved it, and they put it into production. and it was launched in 1950. The womb chair and the side chair were 1948, and these were 1950. The significance of this chair, which continues today, I think, is that it more or less changed Knoll from a company that made beautiful objects into a company that made significant designs for contract interiors. So Knoll went from being an object company to being a really serious volume contract furniture producer, mostly because of this project. This is just such a great photograph. Here's one of the offices at the GM Tech Center where I think there are 5,000 employees. The first building, the project I think was awarded in '44 to Eliel Saarinen's office. And because of the war, the first building wasn't installed until '49. And it included lots and lots of Knoll furniture. So much so that Florence Knoll said, quoted in the first Knoll history, that I was really scared when we had to make so many chairs. So that was around 1951 when the 70 series was completed, which also there was a secretarial chair and stool that was part of that. And then 2 or 3 years went by, and in 1954, Hans Knoll and Hans and Schuh got Eero to agree to move forward on a new collection for Knoll. And Hans sent him this note saying how happy he was, and Eero responded saying, I'm really enthusiastic about the whole idea. I've been working evenings, I have a whole wall full of sketches. I've come up with an idea that will wipe Herman Miller off the map. So and that's a Charlie Eames dig. And as you know, they went out of business soon after that. No, they didn't. Here are a couple of the sketches that he did, which are my favorites. I wish he had put this one, the denture. The snifter, I guess. But one of the questions people always ask me is, where did the name Tulip collection come from? And I can't find anyone who knows the answer to that. Bobby Cadwallader, who was president of Knoll from 71 to 77, said, I think it was some goddamn marketing idea. He's from Dallas. That's my Dallas accent. So Eero and Hans Knoll realized that with the amount of work that Eero was doing in his practice as an architect, the possibility of Eero devoting enough time to come up with a whole new chair collection was slim. So Hans suggested to Eero, I'm going to give you one of my guys from product development. And Eero and Don Pettit met, and Don Pettit moved up here and lived here for 2 years through the development of the pedestal collection. And they built, like before, models and models and models and models till they finally, I always thought this was rather interesting. This is sort of like a womb pedestal hybrid that never came into being. Although Don Pettit submitted a very similar design like this to Schuh in 1962 or 63 after Eero had died, but it was never developed. But they perfected the form. This is Don working on a plaster cast of one of the final form, and this is the one of the prototypes that Don hand built out of sheets of fiberglass cloth, and the original, I think, the original idea, Eero's original idea, was to have all the chair to be a one-piece mold of plastic, a one-piece plastic mold, but this dimension was too, for the strength of plastics that were available then, this wouldn't take the load, so they had to do the base out of metal. They built them here in Eero's office over whatever that street is over there. They painted them all gray. And in January of 1957, they put them around in the dining room of Eero's house over here. And Schuh Knoll came up and had a look, and they were put into production and launched in 1958. As I say in the book, this is, to me, this collection was Eero's ultimate achievement in terms of accessing the concept of form above all other things. This piece was never meant to be perceived as or understood as anything other than form. It wasn't like chairs today or as Corbu also said, sitting machines. There's no such, chairs today look like sitting, Aeron chairs, all those pipes and stuff everywhere. This is just about form and form alone. Through the use of technology and materials that were available, he, as you all know, he died in 1951. But his furniture went on to be symbolic of an era and occupied a place in the mindset of the American consumer, at least, as something that related to this here newfangled thing, the modern movement. This was a favorite shoe. Noel really liked this. And the pedestal collection remains today, I think, correct me please, Noel people, so the largest selling collection of products in the Noel Studio group of products. But that includes tables too. Questions?